Hi, I'm Charlotte Reeves from Unleashed Education, and you've tuned in to another episode of Edit My Photo. Polona was the winner of the December 2022 Edit My Photo Challenge in the Unleashed Education community. As the winner of the challenge, Polona submitted this image of this gorgeous toller posing on what looks like a derelict boat, complete with colours and textures galore. Unfortunately though, the flat, even lighting doesn't bring out all those lovely textures as well as harsher light would, so we have to work hard in the edit to do the scene justice. In this edit, we'll be doing minimal adjustments in Lightroom and moving quickly onto Photoshop, where I'll be using blending modes on multiple layers to boost the colour and the detail. We'll finish the image off in a rather surprising way to end up with a grungy, arty storytelling image. Feel free to follow along from start to finish, or you can also fast track through the tutorial using the time codes below. As always, I welcome your questions and feedback in the comments. If you like the video, please subscribe for more pet photography, shooting and editing tips and tricks. Hey, so welcome to Lightroom. Now we're not going to be doing a lot of this edit in Lightroom. I've decided to do a lot of it in Photoshop instead to show you the sorts of things that you can achieve in Photoshop. But we will be doing some basic global adjustments. So let's start off with those. So first of all, I think I want to give this a little touch of extra exposure. I'm going to take the highlights down, take the shadows up. I'm going to take the whites up a little just to close that little gap at the top of the histogram there. I'm going to bring the blacks down a little, clarity up a touch, vibrance up a little, and maybe just the shadows up a little bit more as well. So far we have gone from that to this. I also turned profile corrections off as well because I actually kind of like the vignetting and the distortion that the 35mm lens gives. So that's the difference you're seeing around the edges there. So I'm going to do a lot of work in Photoshop to really bring out these grungy sort of industrial sort of textures we've got going on here. But here in Lightroom, I'm going to actually increase the saturation of the blues and greens just as a starting point for then moving into Photoshop. So I'll go to the HSL panel. I'm going to take the saturation on the greens up a little bit. That's actually chosen aqua and blue, which sounds about right. So I'm going to boost that up a little. And I'm also going to go down here to this greenish kind of color. And that's also picked up a little bit of the green as well. And the reason I've been able to do this globally to the whole image is that these colors aren't really present in the dog. So it's not affecting the dog in any way when I give it that little boost. So that's the difference in giving it that little boost there. Now, because this is a wide angle lens with a very shallow depth of field, you will find chromatic aberration along the edges of highlight areas. So there's a little bit of green fringing along the edges here. I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit further here so we can kind of see this. And we can fix this fairly easily, usually here in Lightroom, just by going into the lens corrections panel. Remove chromatic aberration is already ticked and it hasn't really affected it. So we need to go into the manual section of this. I'm going to grab the little eyedropper tool and then I'm just going to click on an area where there's some green fringing. And you'll see that that's taken that away. What it's actually done is move this amount slider and adjusted this hue slider as well. And that's actually done a pretty good job of removing that green chromatic aberration from the edges. So I'm going to leave that like that. That's worked well. So I'm only going to add a couple of masks. Usually I kind of go crazy with the masks, but I'm going to restrain myself here. First up, I'm just going to lighten the dog's face a little. So I'll just grab a brush. So K on the keyboard to go straight to the brush. I'm just going to go over the dog's face, down the neck in that darker area. And then just take that exposure up a little and also the shadows up a little too, just to get a bit more light into the face there. Now I do want to bring out the texture and the contrast in all these sort of grungy painted metal areas. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to add a linear gradient and just darken off these areas to start with. So that's one linear gradient. If I want to add another linear gradient, I just need to go add. You can also press Option M on the keyboard with a little keyboard shortcut there. And then I'm just going to run this along the bottom too. So let's just take the exposure down just a touch on those areas. Not a great deal of adjustment there. So this is before and this is after. So we've got a bit more attention directed towards the dog's face. We've got a bit more color in that painted metal, those greens and blues. And now I think we're ready to take this into Photoshop. Hey, welcome to Photoshop. So the first thing I'm going to do in here is a bit of a tidy up. I'm actually going to leave the leash in this one because I feel like the color ties in well with the surroundings, plus it sort of contributes to the story of, you know, urban exploration. So I think that works quite well. The only thing I'm going to get rid of is this little toggle thing on the leash, so that can go. Also going to get rid of this bit of bird poo here and also just tidy up around the eyes. So it won't take long. I'll do that and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, all done. That was nice and simple. I was mostly using the patch tool, content aware fill, and the spot healing brush tool to do that. Okay, so let's get into the fun stuff. The first thing I'm going to do is really boost the colors of the boat that the dog is standing on. So I'm going to go and create a hue saturation adjustment layer. I'm going to grab the little finger selector here, it gives me an eyedropper. I'm going to put that over some of the blue areas here and actually drag that to the right, and that's going to select cyan as the color, and I'm just going to boost that up a little, so maybe to around there. It's also kind of affected that greenish color there, but I think there's probably some actual green in there, so I'm going to take the eyedropper down onto this green area and again drag to the right. Nope, it's picked up cyan. Okay, I might need to do greens manually, so I'm pretty sure there is green in there. Yes, okay, so that's definitely affecting the bottom of the image there. So the predominant color must still be cyan even though it looks green. It can work really weirdly like that sometimes. So I'm boosting the greens down the bottom. Now the other color I want to boost here is this sort of mustardy yellow color. So let's click in here. That's going to be yellow, and then I'm going to boost that up as well. Now see, that's affected the dog. We're going to need to mask that out. So let's boost this up a little bit. And then go into the background layer. I'm just going to do a subject selection. I've got a keyboard shortcut set up for that. And I use cloud subject selection. I've got an editing toolbox video on that if you want to see how to set that up. Basically just gives you a more accurate subject selection, though it does take a little bit longer because it actually sends your image to the cloud in order to be able to do that. So it doesn't really take that long, to be honest. So here we are with the subject selection. So I'm going to go into the mask here and I'm just going to fill that with black. I just pressed Command Backspace there, and that basically just masks out the dog and stops all of that hue saturation adjustment from applying to the dog. So let's just deselect, Command D, and you can see if I turn that adjustment layer on and off, it's only affecting the background basically. So I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. I'm going to just flatten that down. And the next step is to grungify the background. We're going to add some contrast and some texture, and we're going to do that by using a blending mode. So let's duplicate the background layer. I'm going to just name this so I can keep track of this. So this is grunge background, and I'm going to set the blend mode to color burn. Okay, don't freak out, it's not going to stay like this. So I'm going to reduce the opacity of this down to maybe around 50%. We can kind of fiddle with this later if we want to. Now again, we don't want this applying to the dog, so I'm going to reselect the dog. It was the last thing we selected, so we can just go up to select, reselect, and that'll give us that selection back again. And then I'm going to add a layer mask, but I'll need to hold down Option so that it actually masks the dog out. So It's grungified the background. However, it looks a bit weird because the dog is very sort of low contrast and not grungy at all. So the next step will be to grungify the dog, but we're going to use a different method than we did to the background. We're going to make it a bit softer and not quite so full on. So this time we're going to duplicate the grunge background layer. And I'm going to call it grunge dog. I'm going to invert the mask. So instead of masking out the dog, it's going to mask out the background and only apply to the dog. So we just need to press Command I on the keyboard to invert that mask. Now you'll see if we use color burn, it's just too much on the dog. So instead we're going to change to soft light, which still gives us more contrast than we had previously, but it doesn't go quite as far as that color burn effect. Now we've got a bit of a weird line here. So to fix that, I'm going to go to the grunge background layer. I'll need a black brush, so I'll just swap those foreground and background colors again. And I'm just going to come along this edge here so that background grunge doesn't encroach so much right on the edge of the dog and create that really harsh kind of line. Alright, so I think that sort of fixed that up a bit. Let's just have a look and see the difference that that makes. I'll just go back into history. So look in this area here. So that's before and that's after. It just sort of softens that edge a bit. So let's take a look at the opacity of this grunge dog layer. Do we want it looking this grungy? Let's just take a look. That's with the opacity down. That's with the opacity up higher. We don't want to go that high. I think we want to go just a little bit less in the background. So how about that? Yeah, so the only thing that I think I'll do with the grunge dog is just remove it from the face a little bit to make the face a little bit less contrasty. So I'll just make sure I've got a black brush selected, which I do. The opacity is about sort of 50%, which is good because I want it to apply to the face. I don't want to remove it completely from the face. I just want to sort of take about 50% of the effect off. So I'm just painting that on the face there. So let's just, that was before, that's after. It's a pretty subtle change, but it's just removed a bit of that contrast from the face. So I don't think we're quite there with the dog yet. I'm going to add a curves layer. I'm going to attach it to the layer underneath. If you just hold down Option on the keyboard and hover over between the two layers, you'll get the icon changing to this icon. And then if you click, it'll attach that adjustment only to the layer directly underneath and it won't apply it to the other layers. So let's go into the properties for this. And I'm just going to pull the shadows and midtones down a little to add just a bit more overall contrast to the dog there. Okay, I think the dog fits in with the background a lot more now. So to see what we've done so far, I'm just going to turn all three of these adjustment layers off and on. We have definitely grungified this picture and I really like how it's looking. Now I want to get a bit more interest and sharpness in the dog's face especially. So I'm going to flatten this down because I'm happy with the way this is looking. I have a custom keyboard shortcut set up for that. And I'm going to use Topaz Sharpen to get a bit more sharpness in the face. So I'll duplicate the background layer. Always do this on a duplicated background layer. And we need Topaz Sharpen. Now, the setting that gives the most amount of sharpening is usually out of focus, very blurry, and I often use this one and then just dial it back by reducing the opacity of the layer. So it's exactly what I'm going to do here. All right, so you can see how extreme the sharpening is. Now, the reason you don't apply this to the rest of the image is because it does really weird stuff like this. So this is definitely not something you want to apply to the whole image. So I'm going to add a mask and it's going to be a black mask because I'm going to hide most of what it's done. So Option, Mask, and then I'm going to grab a white brush and basically just paint in to the face. And I'm gonna take that opacity up. There we go. So now we have the face sharpened, and I think that's actually all I'm going to apply it to, because I want the viewer's attention to go straight to the dog's face and to that really intense gaze and expression. But I think this is a little bit too heavy-handed, so I'm going to take the opacity of this back to maybe around, let's say around 50%. I think that's a good amount of sharpening for the face. So I'm going to flatten that down. Now the eyes look pretty sharp, but I think we can get the catch lights a little bit brighter. So I'm just going to run a quick little action that I've got called Sparkle Eyes. It basically just creates two layers. It's a sharpen layer and also a levels layer, which increases contrast. So both of these come with a black mask. So to apply this to the eyes, I'm just going to paint into the eyes. Now it's mainly the catch lights that I want to target with this levels adjustment. So I'm just going to kind of restrict that to the catch lights, and then the overall sharpen can go to the entire eye. And I might even just take that opacity up a little bit too, to make those a little bit sharper. So that's before, that's after. So beautiful sharp eyes without going overboard, I think. Overboard, that's very apt. The photo of a boat. So I really like the way that this has turned out. There's one more thing I'm going to try just to see if it looks good. We've spent a lot of time kind of boosting the colors, boosting the texture and the contrast, but I'm now going to dial the contrast back to give this image a bit of a matte look, because I think that will sort of help to balance out the extreme editing that we've done and also give a real sort of grungy, arty sort of appearance. So let me just flatten that down. Now I've got an action for running the matte look. I do have an editing toolbox video all about how to create the matte look. So if you want to check that out, go check out that editing toolbox video. I'll link to it below. So I'm just going to run this. Basically what it does is remaps the tones in the image between not black and white, but very, very dark gray and very, very light gray. So in effect, it kind of reduces the contrast in the image. So let me just turn that off and on again. And so it's given a lovely matte sort of feel to these shadows, and it's also done some nice things to the highlights. So instead of the highlights being really stark and white, it's sort of brought them back to more of a gray kind of feel. I really like what it's done to this shot. I'm going to keep it. I'll see you back in Lightroom for a final crop. All right, here we are in Lightroom. Now, how are we going to crop this? This is a full crop, so this is the decision that we're making as a very last stage. And I like to make it as a last stage because what if you want to create a square crop for Instagram? Or what if you want to make a panoramic crop for some other reason? Leaving all of the edges of the image allows you to leave that decision to the very last minute, so you can use the image for lots of different things. So I'm thinking we'll keep with the standard 2:3 crop because that suits it. So let's just go into the crop here. I think I kind of like the jaunty angle, but I think I would like it just a bit straighter. So I'm going to straighten it up. And I actually think I'm going to come in here to get rid of this orange area over here, because I kind of want the dog to be the main focus of the image here. And I feel like that orange bit off to the left just kind of steals my attention a bit. So I'm going to bring that in a little. I'm going to fix up this orange bit. So I'm going to reset that crop and go over here. I'm going to brush over that, and then I'm going to intersect that brush by holding down Option to get the intersect button. I'm going to intersect that with a color range selection. And the color I'm going to choose is that orangey color. So now it's selected everything of that color within that brush. So to counteract that really orangey color, let me try and do it with the white balance to start with. So I'm going to take it blue and maybe take the tint down a little bit as well. And then also I'm going to take the saturation down. Now it's gone kind of pinkish, so let me add some more green. Actually, let me just add a color here. A greenish kind of color that just sort of blends in. Maybe something like that. I think that will be enough to just get rid of that. Okay, because we're only going to see the very corner of it. All right, let's go back to this crop. There it is, the final crop. So we're all finished. This was a really different edit than I would normally do, but I kind of feel like this image was crying out for something like that, with those colors and those textures and that real storytelling kind of feel behind the image. I really feel like the dog was out exploring with the owner, they were finding cool stuff together, and this is the sort of image that just sort of came from that spontaneous moment. So I hope you enjoyed this edit. If you do have any comments and questions, leave them below and I'll get back to you, and I'll catch you in another editing tutorial soon. See ya!